Frank Dawson stood at the kitchen sink, twisting the lid of a stubborn jar of pickles with hands that used to rebuild engines blindfolded. The lid wouldn't budge. He set it down with a sigh, the glass clinking on the counter, louder than it should have been in the silence. Sunlight leaked through the yellow curtains Ellen had picked out a decade ago, back when their kitchen still smelled like fresh bread and laughter. Now, everything smelled faintly of metal, dust, and something older than time itself. 68 years had a weight, and Frank felt all of them pressing on his spine that morning. Outside, the mail truck wheezed by. Bills, probably. Flyers. Nothing personal. Nothing ever was anymore. He shuffled into the living room, stepping around the ottoman with the careful choreography of someone who couldn't afford to fall. The television murmured in the background, some morning talk show, too loud and too cheerful, voices overlapping like bad advice. He lowered the volume and reached for the remote, then hesitated. Something tugged at him, a strange flicker of resistance to the usual routine of reruns and crossword puzzles. He sat down, rubbed his knees, and stared at the blank television screen. What if everything you believed about getting old was wrong? The question seemed to rise from the silence itself, like a whisper in his mind that didn't feel like his own. Frank blinked. Where the hell did that come from? Curious, maybe bored, he reached for his old iPad, a gift from Melissa, his daughter, back when they still spoke regularly. He hadn't updated it in years, but it still worked. Barely. He opened YouTube. He didn't know what he was looking for, but his thumb tapped into the search bar like it had a mind of its own. He typed Elon Musk interview, thinking of something he'd heard on the news, something about rockets, Mars, self-driving cars. Futuristic nonsense. Still, there was something magnetic about the man. A video thumbnail popped up, Elon Musk on fear, failure, and doing what matters. Frank tapped play. The screen flickered to life. Elon's voice filled the room, calm but intense, every word weighted with conviction. If something is important enough, even if the odds are against you, you should still do it, Elon said, looking directly into the camera. Frank leaned in. Musk spoke not with the polish of a politician but with the raw edge of a man who'd lost and risked and kept going anyway. He talked about sleeping on couches, about doubters, about pushing through when people told him he was out of his mind. Frank didn't know why, but it hit him like a punch to the gut. This man, half his age, a billionaire genius, wasn't talking about money or space or AI. Not really. He was talking about the fight. About trying. About not letting the world tell you it's too late. Frank paused the video. His thumb hovered over the screen. Something electric stirred in his chest, a warmth he hadn't felt since before Ellen got sick. It wasn't hope, exactly. Not yet. More like defiance. Like a tiny voice whispering, what if he's right? He stood up, knees popping, and walked to the back door. The sun was higher now, and the heat pressed down gently, reminding him it was still August. He opened the garage door, a slow groan of metal on metal. The smell hit him immediately, oil, rust, old rubber. The Mustang sat there, covered in a tarp like a forgotten dream. It was a 1967 fastback. His project. His promise. He'd started it with Ellen, planned to fix it up and drive it along the coast after retirement. But then she got sick. Then she died. Then Melissa drifted away. And the Mustang sat. Years passed. He approached the car, heart thumping harder than it should have. He pulled the tarp back slowly. Dust billowed up. The hood was speckled with rust, but the lines were still beautiful. Strong. Defiant. Like him, maybe. Or who he used to be. His reflection in the car window startled him, gray hair, sunken cheeks, eyes that had forgotten how to dream. He placed a hand on the metal. Cold. Familiar. He closed his eyes. Ellen had always believed in finishing what they started. Maybe this was what she meant. Back in the kitchen, the jar of pickles still sat on the counter, unopened. He picked it up again, twisted hard. Nothing. He chuckled bitterly, then grabbed a rubber grip from the drawer, one of those tools they advertise to old folks who can't manage on their own anymore. He tried again. This time, the lid gave. It popped with a quiet surrender. Frank set the jar down, heart racing like he'd just won something. He returned to the iPad. Hit play. Elon was still talking. "I don't ever give up," Musk said. "I mean, I'd have to be dead or completely incapacitated." Frank stared at the screen. Maybe it was a show. Maybe it was staged. But something inside him shifted. Not a leap, just a tilt. A turn toward the light. He went back to the garage, this time with a rag and a bottle of cleaner. He wiped the hood slowly, carefully, like someone returning to a long-lost friend. The metal shone under the dirt. He opened the driver's side door. It creaked. He sat inside. The seat groaned under his weight, but it held him. He rested his hands on the wheel. Closed his eyes. In his mind, he saw Ellen in the passenger seat, grinning. Her hair blowing in the wind. "Where to, handsome," she used to say. He didn't cry. Not this time. But the ache in his chest softened into something else, something like longing, or purpose. Maybe both. That night, he pulled out an old notepad from the junk drawer and wrote down 3 words, "Start tomorrow morning." He didn't define what that meant. He didn't have to. His hands remembered. His mind, though slower, still worked. And his heart, his stubborn, aching, relentless heart, had just woken up. Before he went to bed, he picked up his phone and opened a voice recording app. He had something he needed to say, even if no one heard it. "If you're over 60, he said into the mic, voice gravelly, "and you think it's too late, it's not. That's a lie. You're still here. You still matter. You just forgot for a while. I did too." He hit stop. Saved the file. Slept better than he had in weeks. The next morning, he opened the garage at sunrise. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Frank had always been a man of motion, the kind of guy who measured his worth not in hours or dollars but in things built, fixed, lifted, or restored. Growing up in Toledo in the 60s, he spent weekends in the garage with his father, a quiet World War II vet who could coax a V8 engine into purring like a kitten with nothing but a wrench and intuition. Those hours in the garage were sacred. That's where Frank learned that you don't have to say much to love someone deeply. His dad wasn't a talker, but he showed up every day. And Frank had promised himself he'd be the same kind of man. That promise carried him through his 20s and 30s, through late nights under hoods and the smell of gasoline clinging to his skin like a second identity. It got him through the lean years when his own garage business barely scraped by. It got him through the good years, too, when customers came from all over the county for Frank Dawson's touch. He never made a fortune, but he never needed one. He had Ellen. She was soft where he was hard, light where he was heavy, a quiet laugh that felt like home. They met at a county fair in '78. He was eating a chili dog and trying to look cool in his oil-stained coveralls when she walked by with that sky-blue dress and a smile that made him forget how to chew. She liked that he worked with his hands. Said he was real in a world full of talkers. They married a year later. Bought a small house with a half-acre yard and a garage that would become his sanctuary. They had Melissa in '82, and for a while, life felt like it was running on all cylinders. Frank worked long hours, but he was always home for dinner. Always brought Ellen daisies on Fridays. Always made time for bedtime stories, even when his back hurt and his hands were black with grease. But time has a way of slipping. Ellen got sick in her 50s. Breast cancer. At first, they fought. Appointments, treatments, hope. Frank learned to cook, to fold laundry the way she liked, to hold her when she cried in the middle of the night. Melissa was in college by then, studying psychology, and she came home more often, worried but hopeful. But cancer doesn't always play fair. After 3 years of fighting, Ellen passed quietly in her sleep on a rainy Tuesday in April. Frank didn't cry at the funeral. He didn't cry for weeks. He went back to the garage, tried to keep the rhythm, tried to keep the promise of being the man who shows up. But everything had lost color. The radio stayed off. The daisies never came back. Melissa tried to pull him out. She invited him over, suggested he sell the house, move closer. But Frank felt anchored to that garage, to the life he'd built. Leaving it felt like erasing everything that mattered. The real fracture came 2 years later. It was Melissa's birthday. Frank forgot. He'd been in the garage, staring at the Mustang, the one he and Ellen had planned to restore together. He didn't call, didn't send a card. Melissa called that night, voice shaking with anger and pain. "It's like you don't care anymore," she said. "Like Mom died and you gave up on everything, including me." Frank, wounded and defensive, snapped back something he couldn't even remember now, only that it had ended with silence. A long one. They hadn't really spoken since. He sent Christmas cards. She never responded. The house felt emptier each year. The living room, once filled with music and Ellen's ridiculous seasonal decorations, now sat like a museum to a life that had moved on without him. Dust settled in the corners. Photographs on the mantel faded just slightly, the smiles in them suspended in time while Frank aged in real time. His knees hurt more. His hands trembled sometimes. The doctor said arthritis, maybe early signs of something else. He prescribed pills, told him to slow down, stay safe. As if safety could replace meaning. Retirement, they called it. Rest, relaxation, golden years. But no one tells you about the hours. Endless, silent hours. No purpose. No one to need you. No one to argue with about what to watch or who's hogging the covers. Just quiet. Heavy, punishing quiet. He started watching more TV, the kind that numbs you. Game shows, cooking competitions, crime dramas with the volume too high. He took walks around the block, nodded at neighbors he barely knew. He tried reading, but the words slipped off his mind like water off a tarp. Even the Mustang, once a symbol of dreams deferred, started to feel more like a tombstone. A monument to what never got finished. Sometimes he'd open the garage, stand there with a wrench in his hand, then set it down without turning a single bolt. The motivation never came. The grief sat in his bones like rust. The future didn't seem to stretch anymore, it just sagged. He missed Ellen in a million small ways. The way she hummed while cooking. The way she laughed at her own terrible jokes. The way she touched his arm when passing by, like a reminder that he was never alone. He missed Melissa too, but the guilt there was harder to carry. He'd failed her, he knew that. Not just on her birthday, but in the long silence that followed. He didn't know how to fix it. Apologizing felt too small. Trying felt like digging a hole with his bare hands. So he didn't try. He just survived. Day by day. Until that morning with the pickles, the aching hands, and Elon Musk's voice crackling from a dusty iPad speaker. That morning didn't fix anything, not really. But it cracked the surface. Reminded him of something he'd forgotten, he used to fight. Not just for engines and deadlines, but for meaning. For pride. For people. He wasn't sure what it meant yet, wasn't even sure if he had the strength to chase it, but something had lit up inside him again. A flicker. And sometimes, all it takes is a flicker. He found himself thinking about that phrase, a life on hold. That's what he'd been living. Paused. As if time would rewind or someone would press play again and everything would go back to normal. But there was no going back. There was only forward, or nothing at all. The next morning, after scribbling his little note, "Start tomorrow morning," he walked to the garage and didn't just stare at the Mustang. He grabbed a rag. Wiped down the windshield. Opened the hood. Took stock. It needed a lot. New hoses. The battery was probably toast. Rust along the frame. The tires were bald. But underneath all of that, it was still a Mustang. Still something worth saving. Like him. That night, he went online and searched for parts. Nothing fancy. Just a few basics. It felt good to click order. To believe in a project again. He even checked Melissa's Facebook for the first time in over a year. She had new photos up. Her smile was tighter now. Grown up. Sad, maybe. There was a dog. A little terrier. She'd named it Charlie. Frank wondered if Charlie liked car rides. He almost clicked like. Almost sent a message. Didn't. Not yet. But the flicker was still there, steady now. Waiting. The first letter wasn't meant to be sent. Frank sat at the kitchen table, same one he and Ellen had shared meals at for over 3 decades, and stared at a blank sheet of lined paper from the old yellow legal pad he kept near the fridge for grocery lists he never used. His pen hovered, hesitating. The house was still. Morning light crept in through the window, outlining the dust in the air, like time itself was visible now. He hadn't written a real letter in years. Emails, sure, and the occasional text, but this felt different, like dipping into something sacred. He wrote, "Dear Melissa," at the top, then stopped, unsure how to begin a conversation 5 years overdue. She was 37 now. Last he heard, she'd been managing a clinic in Columbus, something to do with trauma recovery, helping people find their way back from dark places. Funny, he thought, she probably didn't realize she came from one. Not dark in a bad way, but in a way that never acknowledged feelings out loud. Their house had been filled with good intentions, hard work, duty, and quiet affection, but not a lot of open talks. Ellen had tried, but Frank, well, he came from a different time, and a different kind of father. The kind who taught you to fix a car before he ever said he loved you. He finally started writing. "I'm not good at this," the letter began. "But I'm trying. I want you to know I think about you every day. Not just lately, every single day since the last time we spoke." His hand trembled slightly, but he kept going, his words scrawled unevenly, the ink slightly smudged from the sweat on his palm. "I missed your birthday again. No excuse this time. I just didn't know how to call. The longer it got, the harder it became. And I told myself maybe you were better off without me. But I was wrong." He paused, staring out the window at the backyard, overgrown now. Weeds had taken over Ellen's old garden. The raised beds were falling apart, and the little bench she used to sit on had rotted at one leg and leaned like it was bowing to time itself. He tapped his pen. Then continued. "You were right. When you said I gave up after your mom died, you were right. I didn't mean to, but it swallowed me. Grief is loud at first, but over time it becomes a kind of silence. A silence I lived in too long. And in that silence, I lost more than just her. I lost us." He scratched out a line. Rewrote it. "I'm trying to change. I don't know what that looks like yet, but yesterday I cleaned off the old Mustang. I know that might sound silly, but it felt like waking up. Something about building again. About fixing." He signed the bottom with his full name, as if she wouldn't recognize it otherwise, and folded the paper carefully. But instead of placing it in an envelope, he tucked it inside a drawer in the hutch, beside Ellen's recipe cards and some old birthday candles. The next day, he wrote another. Shorter this time. Today I ordered parts for the Mustang. Did you know I kept your drawing of it? The one you made in 5th grade. You taped it to the toolbox. It's still there. You drew flames on the sides. I never told you, but I always loved that. That one he folded and placed on top of the first. Then he kept writing. Not every day, but often. Letters about the garage. About a bird that built a nest above the side door. About his walk to the corner store where the cashier asked how his day was, and he almost cried because no one had in so long. About Max, the neighbor boy who waved every day on his bike. He told Melissa how Max had started helping with the car, asking questions about torque and horsepower, reminding Frank of himself at 14. He even joked that maybe he was starting a new Dawson Garage School for the curious and restless. He didn't know what he was doing with the letters. He wasn't brave enough to send them, but he couldn't stop writing them either. They became his way of speaking into the void, hoping one day someone might listen. They became a map out of the silence. And for the first time in a long time, he started remembering things not with regret, but with warmth. He remembered how Melissa used to sit on a stool in the garage, legs swinging, while he worked under the hood. How she once asked him what the carburetor did, and he spent 20 minutes explaining it until she finally said, "So, basically, it helps the car breathe," and he thought that was the smartest thing anyone had ever said about a machine. He remembered her laugh when she beat him at Monopoly. Her frustration when he couldn't say, "I'm proud of you," without turning it into a joke. He remembered all the little chances he'd missed to say what mattered. But instead of drowning in it, he put it on paper. He wrote about how sorry he was. How proud. How grateful. And in doing so, he felt lighter. One evening, after polishing the Mustang's chrome bumpers until they shined like mirrors, Frank pulled a lawn chair into the driveway and sat beside the car, sipping lukewarm coffee from an old thermos. Max came over, skateboard tucked under his arm. "Is that thing gonna drive someday?" he asked, eyeing the car like it was Excalibur. Frank smiled. "That's the plan, kid. You need help?" Max asked. "I don't know much about cars, but I can Google stuff." Frank chuckled. "You know how to hand me the right wrench when I ask for it?" "Depends. You mean by size or funny nickname?" "Both." "Then yeah, I'm your guy." From that day, Max became a regular. Frank started teaching again, little things at first. How to check oil. How to clean spark plugs. How to listen to an engine and hear what it's trying to say. It felt good. Like the old rhythm. Like passing something on. One morning, while sorting bolts by size and threading them into labeled jars, Frank found himself humming a song Ellen used to sing while baking. He stopped, surprised. Then smiled. Progress. Later that week, after finishing another letter and sliding it into the growing stack in the drawer, Frank stared at his phone for a long time. He opened his text messages. Scrolled to Melissa's name. The last text was over a year old. Just said, "Happy birthday." No reply. He typed, erased, typed again. Finally, he sent, "Hi. Just thinking about you. Hope you're doing okay. Dad." He didn't expect a response. And when none came that day, or the next, he wasn't devastated. He folded another letter instead. Wrote about the carburetor. About Max's clumsy but well-meaning attempts to change a tire. About how the Mustang might actually come back to life by the end of the year. He ended it with, "Miss you. Love you. Always." He placed it in the drawer, a growing archive of unsent truths. They were just paper, but they were something else too. A bridge. And bridges take time. But Frank was beginning to believe they could still be built. Even now. Even after everything. The paper on the exam table stuck to the back of Frank's thighs in the worst way, crinkling loudly every time he shifted his weight. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, and the air smelled sterile, too clean, like nothing human ever really happened there. The walls were a pale yellow meant to soothe, but they only reminded Frank of old wallpaper and forgotten promises. He hated doctors. Not because he was afraid of bad news, but because he didn't like being reminded that time was running things now, not him. At home, in his garage, time bowed to his will. He could rebuild a carburetor, strip a bolt, grease a gear, and things would obey. Here, he was just another old man in a gown too thin for decency, waiting to hear how much slower, softer, and smaller his life was supposed to get. Dr. Kim knocked and entered without waiting. She was young, early 30s maybe, with bright eyes and a voice that always sounded like it had somewhere else to be. She smiled politely, then glanced at her tablet. "Mr. Dawson, thanks for coming in. Got your labs back?" Frank grunted, which he hoped sounded neutral. "Let's get to it." Dr. Kim pulled up a stool and sat, her eyes still on the screen. "Your blood sugar is elevated. Not dangerous yet, but it's trending toward prediabetes. Cholesterol is high. Blood pressure's up. Your weight's crept a little since last year. All from sitting too long in front of the TV," Frank muttered. She looked at him, finally making full eye contact. "Or from grief. Or isolation. Or just life. But here's the truth, Frank, you're 68. This is the time to make changes, not give up." He raised an eyebrow. "What kind of changes?" "Diet, exercise. Less processed food. 30 minutes of walking every day. Maybe talk to someone, too. About everything you've been through." "So you're telling me to slow down," he said, more sharply than he intended. Dr. Kim didn't flinch. "I'm telling you to re-engage. There's a difference." The word sat there for a moment. Re-engage. Frank didn't know how to explain that he'd only just started to do that. That the garage was alive again. That a dusty old car had become a lifeline. That a neighborhood kid was teaching him how to speak to someone who still had their whole life ahead of them. Instead, he nodded like a good patient and took the printed papers she handed him, diet suggestions, numbers, goals. He tucked them into his jacket pocket, unopened. "You're not dying," Dr. Kim said as he stood. "But you're not living fully either. You've still got time. Use it." He left without responding. The drive home was quiet. No radio. Just the hum of his truck's engine and the weight of her words echoing in his mind. Use it. The sky was a flat gray, and the leaves on the trees looked tired, like they were getting ready to fall but hadn't quite decided when. When he got home, he went straight to the garage. The Mustang sat where it always did, but now it felt like it was waiting for him. Like it knew. He popped the hood and stared at the engine. He hadn't touched it in days. The letters to Melissa had distracted him. So had his own hesitation. He wiped his hands on a rag and pulled a wrench from the wall. 30 minutes later, Max rode up on his skateboard and skidded to a stop. "Hey Mr. D. What's up?" Frank nodded toward the passenger side. "You ever pulled a spark plug before?" "Not unless it's in a video game," Max said, grinning. Frank handed him a socket wrench. "Well, time to learn. I'm not supposed to lift too much today. Doctor's orders." Max looked confused but took the tool. "You okay?" "I'm fine. Just old. Officially." Max laughed, but Frank didn't. Not really. Later that evening, after Max had gone home and the garage was quiet again, Frank stood in front of the mirror in the bathroom and took a long look at himself. His face sagged more than he remembered. His hands trembled slightly when still. His chest hair had gone gray. Ellen used to tease him about it, saying it made him look like a wise mountain wolf. Now it just looked like age. He stepped on the scale. The number stared back at him, confirming what the doctor had said. Still, he didn't feel like a man on the verge of collapse. He didn't feel like he was done. He just felt, paused. Again. But this time, he didn't want to stay there. That night, instead of watching TV, he walked around the block. Twice. Slow, steady, hands in his jacket pockets. The stars were out, scattered like holes in a curtain, and the moon looked like a broken tooth. He passed houses with glowing windows, silhouettes of families inside. He wasn't sad, exactly, just aware. He wasn't part of that world anymore, but he didn't have to be invisible either. The next day, he made eggs instead of frozen waffles. Just one slice of toast. No bacon. He grumbled to himself the entire time, but he ate it. Then he walked again. Max showed up later with 2 fast food burgers, and Frank thanked him, took one, then scraped half the bun off before eating it. "What's with the healthy vibe?" Max asked between bites. "Trying not to die before the car starts," Frank said. Max laughed, but there was something serious behind Frank's voice. That afternoon, they got the new battery in. The Mustang made a grinding noise, coughed once, and fell silent. But it was more life than it had shown in years. Frank smiled. "We're getting closer." That night, he wrote another letter to Melissa. "Doctor says I'm borderline diabetic. Don't worry, I'm making changes. Funny how rebuilding the car made me want to rebuild myself too. One bolt at a time. One walk at a time. Maybe that's how we fix anything. Not all at once. Just enough, each day, to keep moving forward." He signed it and placed it on the stack, now thick enough to need a rubber band. The drawer barely closed. He didn't know if he'd ever send them. But he was living them. That counted for something. The following week, he joined a local walking group for seniors. They met at the park twice a week. Mostly women. All of them seemed surprised to see him. One, named Evelyn, wore bright pink sneakers and talked about her cats non-stop. Another, named June, asked him if he was a widower within 5 minutes. "Yes," he said simply. "Me too," she replied, nodding. "Walking helps." And it did. It helped more than he expected. Helped loosen the stiffness in his legs, the tightness in his chest, the frozen parts of his mind that hadn't dared to imagine a future. The more he walked, the more he thought. About life. About how people always said, "You're lucky to be alive," like it was a given, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was a choice. That Sunday, he shaved. Properly. Used aftershave. Put on a clean flannel shirt. He looked in the mirror and said aloud, "Use it." His reflection didn't argue. In the garage, the Mustang gleamed. The chrome trim sparkled in the sun, and Frank felt something stir deep in his chest, a quiet, growing certainty. The car would run again. Melissa might call again. His hands, his heart, his life, they weren't done. They were just under repair. Like all things worth keeping. That night, he clicked record on his phone and said, "If you're over 60 and the doctor tells you to slow down, don't hear that as the end. Hear it as the start of something new. Maybe you can't run marathons. Maybe you'll never bench press again. But you can build. You can walk. You can love. And you can damn well drive a Mustang into your 70s. It was just past 7 a.m. When Frank stood in the driveway, keys in hand, staring at the Mustang like it might answer him back. The engine hadn't turned over yet, not fully, but everything was in place. Battery wired. Spark plug seated. Fuel line clean. Max had double-checked the ignition coil the day before, reading every tutorial he could find on his phone while Frank tightened bolts with fingers that didn't shake as much as they used to. They'd argued over which wrench to use, laughed when Frank accidentally spilled oil on his boots, and high-fived when they finally got the timing belt aligned. It had taken weeks, but it was ready. Or at least ready enough to try. The morning air was crisp, still holding the last breath of summer, and the leaves were starting to change, little bursts of orange and red peeking through green like someone had taken a paintbrush to the neighborhood. Frank took a deep breath and slid into the driver's seat. The upholstery still smelled faintly of dust and something older, like memory. His hands gripped the wheel, steady now, sure. He turned the key. The engine groaned. Coughed. Nothing. He waited. Tried again. Max stood nearby, watching with wide eyes, skateboard at his feet. Want me to try from the outside? Frank shook his head. Let's give her one more. He turned the key a third time. The Mustang gave a choking sound, then, like a miracle, a low, rough rumble. The engine sputtered, then caught. Alive. The sound wasn't smooth, but it was real. Frank's heart kicked hard in his chest as the car vibrated beneath him. We did it, Max said, voice high, excited. Holy crap, we actually did it. Frank laughed, a deep, full laugh he hadn't heard from himself in years. It echoed off the houses like music. She's alive, he said, grinning like a boy again. She's really alive. The garage was filled with smoke, the kind that smelled like old oil and something reborn. He pulled the car forward, slowly, letting it idle in the driveway. Neighbors peeked out from windows. Mrs. Riley from 2 doors down clapped from her porch. Even the mailman paused and gave Frank a thumbs up. For a moment, Frank wasn't old. He wasn't broken or forgotten. He was a man who had made something live again. Max jumped up and down, cheering. You gotta take it around the block. Eventually, Frank said, heart still pounding. Not today. Still gotta check the brakes. Fluids. I want it right. But the spark had come, not just in the ignition, but inside him. That night, after Max had gone home and the driveway was quiet again, Frank sat in the Mustang with the windows down and a notepad in his lap. He scribbled down everything they'd done. Every step, every part, every setback. A record, not just for Max, or for himself, but maybe for someone else. Someone who might need to remember that you can still start something at 68. He thought about Elon Musk again, that voice from months ago, don't fear failure. Fear never trying. He looked around the garage, now cleaner than it had been in years. Tools hung with pride. Oil stains wiped. The space felt less like a tomb and more like a shop again. A place where things happened. Where life happened. Frank decided to film a video. He didn't plan it. Just hit record on his phone, held it steady with one hand, the Mustang rumbling quietly in the background. Hey, he began. Name's Frank Dawson. I'm 68. Retired mechanic. Widower. And until a few months ago, I thought I was done. Thought life had passed me by. Thought maybe it was all downhill from here. He paused. Looked toward the car. But then I heard something, just a quote, from Elon Musk of all people. He said, "You're never too old to be useful. You're never too old to build." And something about that stuck. So I started fixing this car. One bolt at a time. Didn't think it'd mean anything. But somewhere between the oil changes and the late nights and the cursing at rusted bolts, I realized, I wasn't just fixing the car. I was fixing me. He swallowed hard, emotions catching unexpectedly. And today, for the first time in over a decade, I heard that engine run. And it felt like I came back to life too. He ended the video with a smile. So if you're out there, over 60, wondering if it's too late, it's not. Find your spark. Build something. Rebuild something. Just don't stay stuck. You've still got time. Use it. He posted it on Facebook, not expecting much. Just wanted it out there. A whisper into the digital world. The next morning, he had over 200 comments. Old friends. Former customers. Strangers. People saying they cried. People saying thank you. People saying, I needed this today. One woman from Arizona wrote, my husband passed last year. I haven't left the house in months. After watching this, I went outside and watered my garden for the first time in weeks. Thank you. Another man said, 64 here. Haven't touched my guitar in a decade. Pulled it out this morning. Strings still work. So do I. Frank blinked at the screen, stunned. It hadn't occurred to him that anyone else might be waiting for permission to start living again. That his story, his voice, might carry weight. That his pain could be turned into a tool, like every wrench in his garage. He filmed another video. Just said thank you. Talked a little about the next steps for the car. Asked if anyone else had projects they were starting. Within days, he had a following. Not viral, not huge, but real. Hundreds of older folks leaving comments, sharing stories, cheering each other on. He began calling it the Spark Club. Because sometimes, he wrote in one post, all you need is a spark. Max helped him edit some of the videos, adding music and captions. You're officially cooler than most YouTubers, Max said one day, scrolling through the comments. Even my mom watches your stuff now. Says you remind her of her dad. Frank smiled. Is that good or bad? Good, Max said. He was her hero. Frank felt something swell in his chest. Not pride exactly, something deeper. Connection. Purpose. That evening, as he closed up the garage, he pulled out the stack of letters to Melissa and sat with them in his lap. They were heavy now, thick with time and truth. He stared at them, then finally, decisively, pulled out one envelope. Wrote her name on the front. Let's see, he said aloud. Let's just see. He placed it in the mailbox the next morning. Flag up. And for the first time in years, Frank felt peace, not because everything was fixed, but because he'd finally taken the first real step. The spark had started something. Not just a car. Not just a project. A movement. A life. A second chance. And now, he was ready to see where it would drive him. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but the sky was already starting to soften, trading the heavy blue of night for streaks of orange and gold. Frank stood in the garage, keys dangling from his hand, the Mustang gleaming beside him like a coiled memory ready to spring forward. The final safety checks had been done twice over. Tire pressure, brake fluid, lights, everything. Max had even printed out a checklist from the DMV website, reading each item out loud while Frank nodded and checked it off. It was ready. Really ready this time. Frank slid into the driver's seat, the leather still stiff from disuse but now softened slightly by recent hours in the sun. The steering wheel felt firm in his hands, solid, like it remembered him. He glanced over at the passenger seat, now clear except for a folded photo of Ellen taped to the dashboard. It was one of her at 29, leaning on the original Mustang, smiling like she had just told a joke he didn't get yet. He touched the edge of the photo gently, then looked forward again. All right, sweetheart, he muttered. Let's go for a ride. The engine roared to life on the first try, a low, throaty sound that vibrated through his bones in the best way. He shifted into reverse and backed slowly out of the driveway, watching the house shrink in his rearview mirror. The street was quiet, just a few porch lights still on, and he eased the car into gear and turned the wheel, heading toward the edge of the neighborhood. Max had begged to come, but Frank told him no, this first drive had to be just his. A promise to himself. A moment to mark the return. The wheels hummed against the pavement, the Mustang moving steady and strong, like it knew this was more than just a ride. Frank kept both hands on the wheel, his eyes scanning the road but also flicking now and then to the landscape, houses waking up, dogs barking behind fences, the grocery store on the corner where he used to pick up Ellen's favorite lemon cookies. Everything looked the same but felt different, like he was driving through the world for the first time again. He turned onto the highway, just for a stretch, letting the car stretch its legs. The wind poured through the open window, warm and clean, and he pressed the gas a little harder, feeling the engine respond. For a moment, just a moment, he was 35 again, driving fast with Ellen beside him, Melissa in the back seat, all three of them singing off-key to a Springsteen song. The memory hit so suddenly he had to blink it away, gripping the wheel tighter. He kept driving, past the old high school, past the diner where he and Ellen had their first date, past the park where he used to sit on the bench and wonder if he'd ever feel alive again. The Mustang hummed with life, and with every mile, Frank felt something loosening in his chest, something that had been wound too tight for too long. After nearly an hour, he turned back, heading toward home, heart full and quiet. As he pulled into the driveway, Max was already waiting, bouncing on the curb like a kid on Christmas morning. "Well?" Max called. "Did it run?" Frank turned off the engine and opened the door slowly, stretching as he got out. "Like a dream," he said. "Rough in second gear, but strong. Smooth. Alive." Max fist pumped. "I knew it. I knew she'd run." Frank smiled. "You still want to take her around the block later? You serious? You helped build it." "Course I'm serious. Just keep it under 40. Max grinned wide, eyes shining. "Best day ever." That afternoon, they posted a short video of the drive, Frank behind the wheel, the sound of the engine, Max cheering in the background. The response online was overwhelming. Thousands of views, hundreds of comments. Messages poured in from people saying it reminded them of their first car, of their dad, of the things they still wanted to do. "You made me believe in starting over," one man wrote. "I'm 72 and today I'm digging out my old banjo." Another said, "You and that Mustang just gave me the push to call my sister after 15 years of silence." Frank read every message, heart pounding with something he hadn't felt in a long time, value. His life mattered again, not because it was flashy, but because it was real. A few days later, he got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. Just his name on the envelope. He opened it slowly, breath caught in his chest. It was from Melissa. Just a few lines. "Dad. I saw the video. I don't know what to say yet. But I want you to know, I'm proud of you. And I miss you too." No signature. No date. But it was her handwriting. He would know it anywhere. He stood there for a long time, letter trembling in his hands. Then he sat down in the garage, next to the Mustang, and cried. Not the way he did at Ellen's funeral, quiet and clenched. This was different. This was release. This was gratitude. The next day, he wrote her a new letter, the only one he planned to send on purpose. "Melissa, thank you. That's all I needed. That one sentence. I'll wait as long as you need, but I'll keep writing, just like I have. I hope one day you'll read them. I hope one day we can sit in this car together and talk like we should have a long time ago." He signed it with love, Real love, and put it in the mail without fear. A week passed. Then two. Max continued to visit. They started working on other small projects in the garage. An old lawn mower for a neighbor. A rusty bike someone left by the curb. Frank was starting to think maybe he could teach a class. Nothing fancy. Just garage basics with Frank. He mentioned it in a video, half joking. The next day, 4 people commented that they'd sign up if he did it. "Hell, I'd fly out just to learn how to hold a wrench like that," someone wrote. Frank laughed out loud, alone in the garage, and for the first time in his life, considered what it meant to be wanted again, not just remembered, but needed. One morning, he got an email. Not from Melissa. From a local nonprofit. They'd seen his video series. They ran a community center for seniors and wanted to know if he'd come speak to a group about starting over, about finding purpose again. Frank stared at the screen for a long time. He'd never given a speech in his life. But something in him said yes before his brain could talk him out of it. Happy to, he typed back. Tell me when and where. That night, he stood in front of his mirror, practicing what he might say. He fumbled through half a dozen versions of an introduction. But one thing stayed the same every time. Hi. My name is Frank. I'm 68 years old. And I just took my first drive again. Not just in a car, but in life. He smiled at himself, steady and sure. The spark had become a flame now. And he had no plans to let it go out. The folding chairs were mismatched and squeaked when people shifted in them, the coffee was lukewarm and tasted like cardboard, and the overhead fluorescent lights flickered just enough to make Frank blink every few seconds. But none of that mattered, because they'd shown up. Every seat in the small community center's multipurpose room was full, men and women in their 60s, 70s, and even a few in their 80s, all sitting with quiet attention, facing him. Frank Dawson. Mechanic. Widower. Mustang man. He hadn't spoken publicly since high school, when he was forced to give a 2-minute speech on the history of spark plugs and nearly passed out from nerves. But today, somehow, standing behind a scratched-up lectern, with Max sitting cross-legged in the front row holding a phone to record everything, Frank felt oddly calm. Not because he thought he had something profound to say, but because he'd lived something real. And they had come to hear it. Hi. I'm Frank, he said, voice steady, eyes scanning the crowd. I'm 68. I rebuild cars. And until recently, I didn't think life had much left for me. A few people nodded. One woman in the back wiped her eye. Frank cleared his throat. Last year, I stopped doing everything I loved. After my wife passed, I just shut down. Garage got dusty. I stopped going out. Meals were whatever I could microwave. Days blurred together. And for a long time, I thought, maybe that's just how it ends. You get old, you fade. He took a breath. But then something strange happened. I heard a quote, just a random clip online. Elon Musk, of all people. He said, "You're never too old to be useful. You're never too old to build." And for some reason, those words stuck. I didn't believe them at first. But they rattled around in my head until one day, I opened my garage again. Frank glanced toward Max, and this kid showed up with a skateboard and a stubborn streak. Together, we got my old Mustang running again. And somewhere between changing the oil and fighting with rusted bolts, I found my way back to life. He looked back at the room. I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm not a life coach. I just want to tell you this, it's not over. Not if you don't want it to be. Your story doesn't end just because your knees hurt or your kids don't call as much. There's still gas in the tank. Still time to rebuild. When he finished, the room was silent for half a second before it erupted in applause. Not polite applause, real, warm, heartfelt. Frank blinked hard and nodded, stepping away from the lectern. People came up afterward, one by one, then in small groups. A former electrician who missed working with his hands. A retired teacher who used to fix toasters just for fun. A widower who hadn't touched his wife's garden tools in 3 years but now wanted to try again. By the time Frank and Max left, they had a list of over a dozen names, people who wanted to come by his garage, just to watch, to help, to learn, to remember what it felt like to be useful. You're starting something, Max said as they got in the truck. Something big. Frank didn't say anything at first. He just looked down at the list in his hands and felt a strange warmth in his chest. Purpose. That night, he posted a video called "Garage Doors Still Open." He talked about the talk. About the list. About the idea. If you're in the area, he said, and you've got something to fix, something to build, or just want to be around people doing something that matters, come by. Tools are clean. Coffee's hot. And you're welcome. The comments came fast. I'm in. Finally, something for us. How far are you from Austin? Wish I lived closer. But watching this still makes me want to do something. By the following weekend, his driveway had 5 cars in it. Retired folks from 3 different neighborhoods brought toolboxes, folding stools, even snacks. They called it Frank's Community Garage, and it felt like something sacred. They started small. A busted leaf blower. An old push mower with a seized engine. A broken record player. No one was in a rush. No one needed to be perfect. It wasn't about results, it was about rhythm, about rediscovery. The garage buzzed with the sound of laughter, stories, advice, and clinking tools. Max helped set up a corner for video interviews. Each week, they'd feature one person's story. What did you stop doing? Max would ask. And what are you starting again now? The answers were raw, honest, funny, and sometimes heartbreaking. A woman named Sharon, 72, said she hadn't sewn anything in 10 years until she saw Frank's video and went digging through her closet. Turns out my hands still remember how to thread a needle, she said. Guess I do too. A man named George said he used to fix typewriters. Thought no one cared anymore. Now he had a whole bench in the garage dedicated to them. Every week, new faces showed up. Some just watched. Some brought their own projects. One man brought his grandson, who stared in wonder as the grown-ups fixed a chainsaw like it was a spaceship. Frank kept the rules simple: be kind, be patient, and keep trying. The garage was open 3 days a week. Coffee always brewing. The old radio always playing something from the 70s. Frank stood back one afternoon, watching 8 people working on different things, Max helping someone film a clip, 2 women rewiring an old lamp, a man carefully sanding a wooden chair. And he thought, this is what it means to matter. Not to be famous. Not to be young. But to build a space where other people can remember who they are. Melissa still hadn't written again, but Frank didn't mind. He had hope now, the kind that didn't need a schedule. One day, she would. He believed that with his whole being. Late one night, long after everyone had gone home, Frank sat in the Mustang with a fresh cup of coffee and a notebook on his lap. He wrote down 3 words: garage. Spark. Legacy. He didn't know what they would become. Maybe a book. Maybe a nonprofit. Maybe just a memory. But whatever it was, it had begun. And it mattered. He thought of Elon Musk again. Not the billionaire, not the man on magazine covers, but the mindset. Fearless. Rebellious. Always building. Always daring to say, what if? Frank was beginning to understand. The point wasn't to be like Elon. It was to find the Elon inside himself, the spark, the builder, the unrelenting spirit that said, you're not done yet. So he kept showing up. Day after day. Bolt by bolt. Life, it turned out, wasn't just about holding on. It was about opening the door, even if it creaked, and saying, come on in. Let's build something. Frank never expected momentum to feel like this, quiet, steady, not like a race car roaring into the future, but like an old truck finally shifting into second gear after miles in neutral. The garage had become more than a workspace now. It was a haven. Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday mornings, the driveway filled up before sunrise. Most folks came with a thermos of coffee, a project under their arm, and a look in their eye that said, I'm still here. Frank greeted every one of them like they'd just returned from a long journey, because in a way, they had. They came from all over the county now. Word had spread through church bulletins, Facebook groups, and word of mouth like wildfire. Sharon brought in her granddaughter to teach her how to use a sewing machine. George, the typewriter guy, had found someone on eBay trying to sell a 1950s Underwood, and they were restoring it together, each keystroke a soft echo of the past returning home. Frank had barely processed how big it had all become until the day a local news van pulled up. A reporter named Rachel stepped out with a big smile and said, "Mr. Dawson, we'd love to do a story on your garage. People are calling it a movement." Frank laughed, awkward and surprised. "Movement? We're just fixing things." "That's exactly why it matters," she said, her tone gentle. "You're proving it's never too late to start again." The interview aired on a Friday night, and by Saturday morning, there were 10 new people at the garage. Frank walked through the crowd slowly that morning, coffee in hand, heart beating with a strange mixture of humility and disbelief. He wasn't doing anything special, not in his eyes. He was just showing up and keeping the door open. But maybe that was special enough. One man brought his grandson, who had been struggling with depression. He hadn't talked much in weeks, the grandfather whispered. "But last night he watched your video and said, maybe I could build something, too." The boy stood awkwardly by the workbench, hands in his pockets, until Frank handed him a wrench and pointed to an old lawnmower. "Think you can figure out how to get this cover off?" he asked. The boy looked up, surprised, then nodded. It took him 30 minutes, but when the cover came off, the smile that lit his face was like sunrise. Frank turned to Max later that day and said, "You ever feel like you're watching people come back to life?" Max nodded. "Every week. It's like magic, but with oil stains." Frank chuckled. "Magic with oil stains. That's a good one." They started filming more, capturing the transformations, not just of machines, but of people. Every bolt turn seemed to bring a story, and every story gave someone else the courage to try. Max even convinced Frank to start live streaming. "People want to see it happen in real time," Max said. "The struggle, the success. All of it." Frank wasn't sure about going live, but he trusted Max. And the first stream, titled "Rebuild Hour with Frank," drew over 2,000 viewers. Comments poured in, "Watching from Florida, this is better than TV. Reminds me of my dad's old garage. Frank, you give me hope." He never set out to be anyone's example. But maybe that was the beauty of it. He wasn't trying to inspire. He was just living honestly. The next turning point came on a Tuesday afternoon. Frank had just finished tightening the carburetor on a pressure washer when he saw a familiar sedan pull into the driveway. It was older, beige, the kind of car people forget even exists, but he'd know it anywhere. Melissa stepped out slowly, sunglasses on, shoulders tense. For a moment, she didn't see him. She looked at the garage, at the people laughing and working together. Then her eyes landed on him. They froze. The world quieted. Frank wiped his hands on a rag and stepped forward. "Hi," he said, voice shaking. She hesitated, then pulled off her sunglasses. Her eyes were wet. "I wasn't sure I'd actually come." "I'm glad you did." She looked away for a moment, biting her lip. "I got your letter. And the videos. All of them." Frank nodded. "I kept writing. Just in case." "I know," she said. "I read them all. Eventually." A long silence passed. Frank felt every heartbeat like a thunderclap. Then Melissa stepped forward and, without warning, hugged him. Tight. Like she used to when she was a child and had scraped her knee and didn't want words, just closeness. Frank wrapped his arms around her, careful, unsure, then held on tighter. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I was angry for a long time. But I see you now, Dad. I see what you're doing. I missed you every day, he said. Even when I didn't know how to say it. When they finally stepped back, she looked around again. This is incredible. You built a whole world out of a garage. He smiled. Started with a car. Turned into a community. She stayed the rest of the day, watching people work, talking to Max, even helping sort some tools. She laughed for the first time in years, and Frank memorized the sound. That night, after everyone had gone home, they sat in the kitchen, sharing tea like they used to when Ellen was alive. They talked about small things first, weather, food, books. Then, slowly, the big things came out. The pain after Ellen died. The silence between them. The regrets. And finally, the hope. I think I needed to see you fall and get back up, Melissa said. It made me realize it's not too late for me either. Frank blinked away tears. It's never too late, honey. Never. The next week, she brought a broken lamp from her apartment and started working on it beside Frank. They didn't say much that day. They didn't need to. The lamp wasn't the point. The rebuilding was. Around them, the garage hummed with purpose. The Spark Club, as Max had officially dubbed it online, had grown into something real. They had t-shirts now. A Facebook group with over 12,000 members. Messages coming in from around the world. Frank read one from a man in Germany who said, "Watching you helped me take my first walk outside in 3 months." Another from a woman in Montana who started fixing old radios after 30 years away from her workshop. One message hit especially hard, "Frank, you saved my life. I was ready to give up. But now I'm building again. Thank you." Frank sat with that one for a long time. He didn't feel like a hero. But maybe the world didn't need heroes. Maybe it just needed proof that it wasn't over when it felt over. One night, Frank and Max sat under the stars beside the garage, a small fire pit crackling between them. "What do you think is next?" Max asked. Frank stared into the flames. "I think we keep showing up. Keep fixing what's broken. People. Machines. Whatever walks through that door." Max smiled. "That sounds like a plan." Frank leaned back in his chair, the night quiet and full of promise. Second gear, he thought. We're just getting started. The mailbox by Frank's front porch was an old metal box, its paint chipped and peeling, but every morning it carried something new. Sometimes it was bills or catalogs he never ordered, sometimes a neighbor's flyer about a lost dog or a community event. But lately, it had become something different, letters. Handwritten notes on colorful paper, typed pages folded carefully, envelopes with no return address. Letters from strangers who had found Frank's story and felt compelled to write. The first letter came in on a Tuesday, postmarked from a small town in Iowa. It was from a man named Henry, who wrote about his own battles with loneliness after retiring from 50 years as a carpenter. "Your videos gave me permission to pick up my tools again," Henry wrote. "I built a birdhouse this week. It's nothing fancy, but it's mine. Thank you for showing me that it's okay to start small." Frank held that letter in his hands longer than he probably should have, feeling the weight of someone else's hope pressed between the pages. It was a quiet affirmation that what they were doing in that little garage was more than just a hobby. It was a lifeline. Over the next few weeks, the mailbox overflowed with letters. Some were heartfelt thank yous, others shared stories of regret and resilience. One woman from Georgia wrote about losing her husband and feeling invisible in her own family until she discovered Frank's live streams. "You made me believe that I still matter," she said simply. A retired schoolteacher from Ohio enclosed photographs of the first wooden chair he'd built since his arthritis made writing difficult. Each letter was a mirror reflecting the universal truth Frank had come to embrace: people yearn to be seen, to be useful, to find purpose even when the world seemed to have moved on without them. Reading these letters in the quiet of his kitchen, Frank often thought about how Elon Musk had once said, "Persistence is very important." You should not give up unless you are forced to give up. It was one thing to keep showing up in the garage, but it was another to realize that these small acts could ripple far beyond his driveway. Max helped collect the letters and started posting excerpts online, creating a space where others could share their stories. The Letters from Strangers series became a regular feature on their social media channels, each post a window into lives transformed. Soon, people began sending not only letters but photos and videos of their own projects, rusty tools revived, gardens planted, painting started, words written. It was as if Frank's little spark had ignited fires all over the country, and maybe the world. One afternoon, Frank received a thick envelope from a woman named Louise, who lived in a nursing home in Vermont. She wrote that she had been bedridden for months and that watching the garage live streams was the highlight of her day. "Your spirit reminds me of my youth," she wrote. "You give me hope that no matter the years, there is still light." Frank read her letter aloud to the small group at the garage that Saturday morning, and the room fell silent. There was a collective breath held, a shared understanding that they were part of something larger than themselves. It was more than fixing machines. It was mending souls. Inspired by Louise and others like her, Frank and Max started a project called Tools for Hope, collecting donated tools and supplies to send to people who couldn't come to the garage. They mailed out toolkits to isolated seniors, veterans, and anyone who wanted to reclaim their creativity but lacked the means. The responses were overwhelming. A letter came from a man named Harold in Arizona, who hadn't held a wrench since his factory closed. "I'm building a toolbox for my grandson," he wrote. "I'm passing down more than tools, I'm passing down hope." The movement was no longer just local, it was a quiet revolution. On a chilly autumn evening, Frank sat with his journal and wrote down what he was beginning to understand: age wasn't a sentence. It was a doorway. And behind it was a world waiting to be built, piece by piece. But with all the growth, Frank still faced moments of doubt. The night before a big live stream event, he found himself staring out at the dark driveway, wondering if he was enough. "What if I'm just a man clinging to a past that's gone?" he whispered to the empty air. Then, on his phone, a notification popped up, an email from a young woman named Emily, who said she had struggled with anxiety and depression but found solace in watching Frank and the Spark Club. "You don't even know me," she wrote, "but you make me believe I'm not alone. You make me want to keep going." Frank's chest tightened. He realized that his journey was no longer just about fixing what was broken around him, it was about showing others how to repair what felt broken inside. The next day, the live stream event called Build Your Tomorrow was a huge success. Over 5,000 viewers tuned in to watch people share stories, ask questions, and work on projects together in real time. Frank felt connected to a global family united by the simple but powerful idea that it's never too late to build, to heal, to begin again. After the event, Rachel, the reporter from the local news, called him. "Frank, you've become a beacon for so many. What keeps you going?" Frank smiled, thinking about Elon's fearless spirit. "I guess it's this, the belief that purpose doesn't retire. That every day we have a chance to shift gears, to open new doors, to build something that matters, not just for ourselves but for each other." As the months turned into a year, Frank's garage continued to be a hub of hope and transformation. He watched neighbors become friends, strangers become family. He witnessed people reclaim their power, their joy, their identity. The letters kept coming, each one a reminder that their story was just one of many. On a quiet morning, Frank stood outside the garage, the sun warming his face, and felt a peace he hadn't known in decades. The ache of loss was still there, but it no longer defined him. He was no longer waiting for permission to matter. He was living it. And with every letter, every project, every handshake and hug, he knew he wasn't alone. Somewhere out there, in small towns and big cities, across miles and memories, others were finding their second gear too. And together, they were building a legacy far bigger than any one of them alone. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Frank sat in his worn recliner, the soft hum of the evening news in the background, when a short video clip popped up on his phone. A familiar name flashed on the screen: Elon Musk. Frank's heart quickened. It wasn't uncommon for news and social media to feature Elon, but this time, the headline struck a chord: Elon Musk's unexpected message to those over 60, "You're just getting started." Frank tapped play, curiosity and something deeper stirring inside. Elon's voice filled the room, calm but passionate. There's a common myth that when you reach a certain age, your time to innovate or contribute is over. That's simply not true. I believe the opposite. The world needs the wisdom, resilience, and experience that comes with age now more than ever. Don't let anyone tell you you're too old to change, to create, to lead. You are just getting started. Frank felt a surge of energy ripple through him. It wasn't just the words. It was the promise that his story, their story, was part of something bigger, a movement that defied society's limits and expectations. The idea that the best chapters might still be unwritten sparked something wild and fragile inside him: hope. The next morning at the garage, Frank shared the video with the Spark Club. Max played it on the big screen, and the room fell silent, every face reflecting the truth of Elon's words. A woman named Gloria wiped a tear away and said, "I needed to hear that. I've been scared to start painting again because I thought it was pointless." Another man, Jerry, nodded. "If Elon can say it, maybe we can believe it." That day, the garage felt electric. Elon's message was a catalyst, a spark that lit new fires of courage and ambition. Frank noticed it in the way people tackled their projects with renewed vigor, in the way conversations buzzed with possibility instead of doubt. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Frank's live streams incorporated Elon's message, often opening with a quote or a clip. "We're not done," Frank would say. "We're just getting started." People responded. Viewership soared. Messages poured in from around the world, stories of people over 60 who were rediscovering passions, learning new skills, and refusing to fade quietly into the background. One letter came from a woman named Marcia in California. "I'm 68 and just signed up for coding classes. Watching your story and Elon's message gave me the push I needed to stop making excuses." Another from Tom in New York read, "I started volunteering at a community center. It's the best thing I've done in years." Frank realized that Elon's words were more than inspiration, they were a call to action. They challenged the narrative society had written for them and invited everyone to rewrite their own. Inspired by this, Frank and Max planned a special event called the Next Chapter Summit, a live online gathering celebrating people over 60 who were embracing change and making an impact. They invited guest speakers, including a retired teacher who started a podcast, a grandmother who launched a small business, and an artist who began exhibiting her work at 70. The summit was a resounding success, with thousands tuning in and sharing their own stories in chat rooms and comments. Frank read messages from viewers like Sandra, who wrote, "I'm going back to school next semester. It's scary, but I'm ready." The momentum was unstoppable. Behind the scenes, Frank often reflected on how far he had come, from a man crippled by loss and regret to a beacon for others searching for light. Elon's message had redefined his purpose. No longer was he just fixing old machines, he was helping fix lives. One quiet evening, Frank received an unexpected message on social media from an account verified as Elon Musk's official page. The message was brief but powerful: "Keep building. Age is just a number. The future is yours to create." Frank stared at the screen, breath catching. Was it really from Elon? The verification checkmark said yes. Max urged him to respond. "Say something. Tell him what this means." Frank typed slowly, "Thank you. Your words have changed lives, including mine. We're just getting started." The reply came almost immediately, "That's what I like to hear. Let's keep pushing boundaries, together." The interaction was surreal, but for Frank, it was the ultimate affirmation. Elon wasn't just a distant figure or a symbol. He was a partner in this quiet revolution against ageism and despair. With this new connection, Frank's confidence soared. He began dreaming bigger. Plans for expanding the Spark Club into a network of community workshops, partnerships with senior centers, and even collaborations with tech companies eager to engage older adults. One chilly morning, Frank walked into the garage to find a package on the workbench. Inside was a prototype device, a compact toolkit designed by a startup inspired by the Spark Club's mission, aimed at making repairs easier for people with limited mobility. The note inside read, "Inspired by your story. Keep building." Frank held the device close, tears blurring his vision. It was proof that change was no longer a solo journey, it was a wave gaining force and depth. The real breakthrough came not from grand gestures but from the everyday moments. Like the day Gloria, the painter, brought her finished canvas to the garage. The painting was a vivid explosion of colors, raw emotion spilling from every brushstroke. She smiled shyly as Frank and the group gathered around. "I thought I lost this part of me," she said. "But Elon's message made me believe I could find it again." Or the moment Jerry shared that he had signed up for a local leadership class to volunteer in his community. "I always thought leadership was for younger folks," he admitted. "Now I know it's for anyone who's willing." Frank saw himself in them, fear, doubt, courage, triumph, all woven together in a tapestry of second chances. One night, after everyone had left, Frank sat alone and recorded a new message for the live stream. "If you're over 60 and feeling left behind, I want you to know this: you are not alone. You have wisdom, strength, and untapped potential. Elon Musk said it best, this is just the beginning. The future is yours to create. So let's build it, together." He hit send and felt the familiar rush of hope ripple through him. The story was no longer just his. It belonged to everyone who dared to believe in tomorrow. And as the stars glittered outside his window, Frank knew one thing for certain: age was not a limit. It was a launch pad. Despite the growing momentum and the flood of encouragement from supporters around the country, Frank still faced his fair share of doubters. Not the strangers who sent letters or shared stories online, those voices lifted him up, but people close to him who struggled to understand why he was putting so much energy into what they saw as a lost cause. His daughter, Lisa, was the loudest skeptic. One Sunday afternoon, as Frank wiped sawdust from his hands after a morning in the garage, Lisa dropped by unannounced. Her arms were crossed, her brows furrowed. "Dad," she said sharply, "why are you wasting your time with this? You're 68. Maybe it's time to slow down and stop trying to prove something to people who don't care." Frank felt the familiar sting of disappointment. Lisa's words weren't just about the projects or the live streams. They cut deeper, into his identity, his dreams, his very reason for waking up each day. "I'm not trying to prove anything," he replied gently. "I'm trying to live. To find purpose. To help others do the same." Lisa shook her head. "But why now? After all these years?" "It seems like a midlife crisis stretched out into old age." Frank swallowed the lump rising in his throat. He wanted to explain how it wasn't a crisis but a rebirth. How Elon Musk's message had sparked something he thought was lost forever. But how do you explain hope to someone who sees only practicality? The conversation ended awkwardly, and Frank felt the heavy weight of isolation once again. At the next Spark Club meeting, Frank shared his encounter with Lisa. The group listened, some nodding, others quiet. Gloria spoke up, "I get it. My own kids think I'm chasing shadows when I paint. They don't see what it means to me." Jerry added, "It's hard for people to understand when they've never felt that kind of loneliness or fear of being forgotten." Max suggested something bold: "Maybe we should create a space for doubters, too. Share the stories of skepticism and how we deal with it. Could help people feel less alone when they face that pushback." Frank liked the idea. He realized that doubt, both internal and external, was part of the journey, not the enemy but a challenge to overcome. Over the next few weeks, the Spark Club livestream featured segments called Facing the Doubters, where members talked candidly about the naysayers in their lives and how they stayed true to themselves despite the criticism. Viewers began sharing their own stories of family members, friends, or society telling them to act their age or know their place. The conversation struck a nerve. The hashtag Facing the Doubters trended in small but meaningful circles online. Then there were the doctors. Frank's primary care physician, Dr. Patel, was well-meaning but cautious. At his last checkup, she looked over his test results and said, "Frank, I admire your spirit, but you need to take it easy. Your heart isn't what it used to be. Maybe scale back on the physical work." Frank nodded politely, hiding his frustration. He didn't want to dismiss medical advice, but he also refused to let fear dictate his life. Elon's words echoed in his mind, "Persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up." So Frank found a middle ground. He listened to his body, took breaks, and modified tasks when needed, but he never stopped building or connecting. The most painful doubts, however, came from society itself, the subtle messages everywhere that youth equated to value and age to obsolescence. At the grocery store, Frank overheard a clerk talking to a coworker about old folks who should know when to quit. At the local diner, a conversation about the uselessness of retirees drifted through the air. These whispers were harder to fight because they were invisible, woven into everyday life. One day, while walking to the mailbox, Frank passed a group of teenagers skateboarding and joking. One shouted, "Old-timer, you should get a cane or something." Frank paused, feeling the sting of humiliation. But then he remembered something Elon had said in an interview: "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." Frank straightened, smiled, and waved at the kids. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving himself right. The struggle with doubt wasn't only external. Frank faced moments of his own inner critic whispering, "What's the point? Who cares?" In those dark moments, he turned to his journal, writing down fears and hopes, reminding himself that transformation was messy and nonlinear. One night, after a particularly tough day, Frank stumbled upon an old speech by Elon Musk where he said, "Failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough." That phrase became Frank's mantra. He realized that doubt and failure were signs he was pushing boundaries, growing, trying. They weren't reasons to stop but invitations to keep moving forward. With renewed courage, Frank decided to confront doubt head-on by organizing a community event titled, Breaking the Silence. It was a day dedicated to sharing stories of rejection, skepticism, and resilience. The event drew a crowd larger than Frank expected: neighbors, local reporters, even some skeptics curious to see what it was all about. Speakers shared their experiences: a retired firefighter who became a community mentor despite criticism, a widow who started a support group after being told to move on, a young woman caring for elderly parents who found strength in their stories. The atmosphere was electric, charged with vulnerability and solidarity. When it was Frank's turn, he stood at the podium and looked out at the faces before him. He spoke honestly about the doubts he faced, from family, doctors, society, and himself. "There were times I thought maybe they were right," he said. "That maybe this was foolish. But then I remembered Elon Musk's words, 'You're just getting started.' And I chose to believe it." The audience erupted in applause. For Frank, that moment was a turning point. He realized that doubt was not a barrier but a bridge, to deeper connection, authenticity, and growth. The days that followed brought unexpected changes. Lisa reached out, this time with softer words. "Dad, I don't fully get it, but I see how much this means to you. I'm proud of you." It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a start. Frank also received a surprise visit from Dr. Patel, who admitted she'd been worried but now saw how vital this journey was to his well-being. "You've taught me that health isn't just about physical numbers," she said. "It's about purpose, connection, and spirit." Frank smiled, feeling the walls around him soften. Facing the doubters hadn't been easy, but it had forged something new, a community grounded in courage and truth. One evening, as Frank closed the garage after a long day, Max handed him a package. Inside was a framed quote from Elon Musk: "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." Below the words was a handwritten note: "Keep facing those doubters. They don't define you. Elon." Frank placed the frame on the workbench, the light from the lamp casting a warm glow. He thought about the journey so far, the losses, the doubts, the breakthroughs, and knew the path ahead would have more challenges. But now he had a shield forged from resilience and a fire that no skepticism could extinguish. As he locked up for the night, Frank whispered to the empty garage, "I'm not afraid anymore. I'm just getting started." Outside, the stars blinked in quiet approval, a celestial nod to the man who refused to be defined by age or doubt, ready to build his legacy on courage, connection, and hope. Frank woke early with a sense of quiet determination that surprised even him. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft orange glow over the sleepy town. Outside, the air was crisp with the promise of fall, leaves whispering secrets as they swirled in the gentle breeze. Today wasn't marked by any grand event or big announcement, but for Frank, it was a pivotal day, one defined by small steps that might lead to giant leaps. After weeks of inspiration fueled by Elon Musk's messages and the momentum of the Spark Club, Frank realized that transformation didn't have to come in monumental bursts. Sometimes it started with simple, intentional choices: a walk around the block, a phone call to an old friend, a page written in a journal. He put on his jacket, laced up his shoes, and stepped outside. The neighborhood was just waking up, neighbors sipping coffee on porches, dogs tugging on leashes, the hum of life stirring awake. Frank's first step was slow, cautious even, but purposeful. He reminded himself of Elon's words from a recent interview: "If the rules are such that you can't make progress, then you have to fight the rules." Today, Frank wasn't fighting laws or regulations, but the invisible rules of aging, those whispered commands to slow down, to stop dreaming, to accept invisibility. As he walked, he noticed things he hadn't in years: the smell of fresh rain on pavement, the vibrant reds and golds of leaves, the laughter of children playing nearby. Each sensation was a small gift, a reminder that life was still rich with possibility. Back at home, Frank pulled out a dusty notebook he'd found in a drawer, a journal he'd kept during his younger years but abandoned after setbacks and sorrow. Today, he decided to write again. The words came haltingly at first, memories and hopes blending on the page. He wrote about regrets, but also about dreams he hadn't yet dared to chase. He wrote about the Spark Club, the people who inspired him, and the message from Elon that had shifted everything. "It's never too late to build something new," he scribbled. "One step, one breath, one moment at a time." That afternoon, Frank picked up the phone and called his old friend Harold, someone he hadn't spoken to in years after a bitter fallout. The line rang several times before Harold's gruff voice answered. "Frank? Is that you?" The familiar tone carried decades of shared history. "It's me," Frank said simply. "I want to start fresh. Maybe we could meet, talk." Harold hesitated, then agreed. They arranged to meet at a small diner downtown the next day. That evening, Frank returned to the garage, his workshop now feeling more like a sanctuary than a cluttered space. He pulled out an unfinished model airplane he'd been tinkering with for months. The project was imperfect, full of rough edges and mistakes, but it was his creation, proof that progress was not about perfection but persistence. As he worked, he thought about Elon Musk's relentless drive, his willingness to embrace failure and keep pushing forward. Frank realized that every small step he took, whether a walk, a phone call, or a repaired wing on that airplane, was part of his own innovation, his own reinvention. Over the next few days, Frank made a habit of these small acts. He walked farther, talked more openly, wrote more honestly. The phone call to Harold blossomed into a rekindled friendship, filled with laughter, shared memories, and new plans. At the Spark Club meetings, Frank encouraged everyone to embrace small wins, celebrating progress rather than perfection. One member, Ruth, shared that she had started gardening again after 20 years. Another, Miguel, was taking his first online class. The stories multiplied, each one a testament to the power of tiny choices adding up. The community's energy shifted from anxious hope to confident action. Frank also experimented with his live stream, focusing episodes on small steps and inviting viewers to share what tiny moves they were making toward change. Messages poured in, a woman learning to play piano at 72, a man painting murals in his neighborhood at 69, a couple traveling for the first time since retirement. Frank read the stories aloud, the room alive with shared triumph. One evening, as Frank prepared for bed, he reflected on a recent podcast where Elon had said, "The path to progress is often a series of small, relentless steps. You don't have to see the whole staircase, just take the next step." Frank thought about the many unknowns ahead. Physical challenges, societal barriers, moments of doubt, but he felt ready. The future wasn't a distant mountain peak to scale all at once, it was a journey of incremental advances. The next morning brought an unexpected opportunity. Frank received an email from a local community center inviting the Spark Club to host a workshop. The goal was to engage older adults in hands-on projects, creativity, and technology, bridging gaps and breaking stereotypes. Frank accepted immediately. The workshop was scheduled for a chilly Saturday. The community center's hall buzzed with nervous energy as participants arrived, some skeptical, some eager, most unsure what to expect. Frank opened with a simple invitation, "Today, we take small steps. You don't have to be an expert or a genius. You just need to try." The group broke into stations: woodworking, painting, basic coding, storytelling. Frank moved among them, offering encouragement, sharing Elon's messages, reminding everyone that age was not a barrier but a starting point. A woman named Betty, who hadn't held a paintbrush since her youth, hesitated before picking one up. Frank knelt beside her. "It's not about the outcome. It's about the courage to begin." Betty smiled shyly and began to paint. By the end of the day, the hall was filled with laughter, chatter, and the proud display of projects, each one a symbol of courage and reinvention. Frank felt a deep satisfaction. The small steps taken by many were building a powerful movement. That night, as Frank wrote in his journal, he reflected on the day's lessons. Transformation was not a sudden explosion but a steady flame kindled by countless sparks. The people who showed up were rewriting their stories, proving that change was possible at any age. Frank thought back to the long years of doubt, regret, and isolation. He realized that while Elon Musk's message had been the spark, it was the small steps, the walks, the calls, the paintings, the conversations, that were the true engine of change. Each step forward was a declaration of resilience, a refusal to be defined by age or circumstance. As Frank closed his journal, he whispered to the quiet garage, "This is just the beginning. One small step at a time." Outside, the night was calm, the stars steady and bright, a cosmic reminder that even the smallest lights can shine through the darkest skies. The moment Frank walked into the small diner, he felt a mix of nerves and hope stirring deep inside. The worn wooden booths and faded photographs of the town's history made the place feel timeless, like a pocket of yesterday preserved in the present. Harold was already there, sitting alone at a corner table, nursing a coffee. His face looked older than Frank remembered, lined with years of hard work and regrets. But when their eyes met, a flicker of the old friendship sparked to life. "Frank," Harold said, voice rough but warm. "I wasn't sure you'd show up." Frank smiled, settling into the seat across from him. "Neither was I. But here I am." For a while, the conversation was tentative, filled with polite catch-ups and careful words. Then, as the minutes passed, they began to peel back the layers, the years of silence, the grudges held, the loneliness endured. Frank spoke of his journey since turning 60, his struggle with feeling invisible, and the unexpected spark he found in Elon Musk's words about persistence and reinvention. Harold listened, nodding slowly. "I get that," he said finally. "I felt stuck, too. Like life left me behind." Frank realized that beneath their differences, they shared the same fear, the fear of becoming irrelevant, forgotten, obsolete. "Maybe it's not too late," Frank said quietly. "Maybe we can build something new." Over the next few weeks, Frank and Harold met regularly, rebuilding their friendship one conversation at a time. They worked together on Frank's projects, sharing ideas and laughter, slowly erasing the wounds of the past. Their renewed bond reminded Frank that transformation wasn't just about personal growth, it was about reconnecting with others, healing old rifts, and forging new paths together. One afternoon, Frank invited Lisa to join them at the Spark Club meeting. She hesitated but agreed, curiosity overcoming skepticism. The room was alive with energy, stories of change, laughter, and support flowing freely. Frank introduced Lisa to the group, watching as her guarded expression softened. After the meeting, Lisa pulled Frank aside. "I don't understand everything you're doing," she admitted, "but I see you're happier. That matters." Frank felt a flicker of hope. Rebuilding bridges wasn't about immediate forgiveness or forgetting pain, it was about showing up, being vulnerable, and letting love find a way. Inspired by his growing circle, Frank reached out to other estranged relationships, an old friend he'd lost touch with after a bitter argument, a cousin who had drifted away over the years, and even distant neighbors he barely knew. Each reconnection was a small victory, a thread woven back into the fabric of his life. At one point, Frank remembered a quote from Elon Musk that had stayed with him: "When Henry Ford made cheap, reliable cars, people said, 'Nah, what's wrong with a horse?'" That was a huge bet he made, and it worked. Frank realized his own bet was just as big, to believe that it wasn't too late for second chances, for new beginnings. The Spark Club became a space not only for personal reinvention but for healing relationships. Members shared stories of reconciliation, forgiveness, and the courage it took to reach out first. They celebrated the messiness of rebuilding trust and the unexpected joy that followed. As Frank's community grew stronger, so did his own sense of purpose. He began organizing events focused on family healing and connection, inviting counselors, storytellers, and artists to help members explore the past and envision the future. One particularly emotional session involved writing letters to loved ones, whether to be sent or simply expressed in the moment. Frank wrote to his late wife, words flowing freely as he released years of pain and regret. He felt a weight lift, replaced by a quiet peace. Rebuilding bridges also meant confronting hard truths. Frank grappled with his own mistakes and the times he had withdrawn or held grudges. He learned to apologize without expecting immediate forgiveness and to listen without judgment. This humility deepened his relationships and expanded his empathy. Lisa, observing her father's transformation, began to soften even further. She asked to learn about the Spark Club's mission and offered to help with social media outreach. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. The renewed family bond brought Frank a joy he hadn't imagined possible. One crisp morning, Frank and Harold stood in the garage, working side by side on a project. The hum of tools and friendly banter filled the space, a soundtrack of renewal. Frank glanced at a framed photo on the workbench, a picture of him and Harold from decades ago, younger, hopeful, and full of dreams. "You think we can keep building?" Frank asked. Harold grinned. "Hell yeah. One bridge at a time." The journey to rebuild wasn't always smooth. There were setbacks and misunderstandings, moments when old wounds reopened. But Frank learned to lean into discomfort, seeing it as part of the process. Each challenge was an opportunity to practice patience, grace, and resilience. One evening, Frank received a call from Lisa. "Dad, can we talk? I want to understand more about this journey of yours." They met for coffee, and Frank shared his story openly, his fears, his hopes, his mistakes, and the lessons learned. Lisa listened intently, tears in her eyes. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. Frank felt a warmth spread through him. The bridge between them was no longer fragile but strong enough to hold new memories and shared dreams. As the seasons changed, Frank's world expanded beyond his workshop and the Spark Club. He began volunteering at a local senior center, helping others find their own paths to renewal. He spoke at community events, sharing his story of rebuilding and the power of connection. His message was clear: no matter your age or past, it's never too late to heal and grow. One day, a young reporter asked Frank what advice he would give to others struggling with broken relationships or regret. Without hesitation, Frank quoted Elon Musk: "You have to be willing to fail, to be misunderstood, to be vulnerable. But most importantly, you have to keep trying." Frank smiled, thinking back to the days when he felt invisible and defeated. Now, he was a man reborn, not because of grand achievements but because he chose to rebuild bridges, friendships, and family, one step at a time. Standing in the garage that evening, surrounded by the hum of life and the glow of purpose, Frank whispered to the quiet air, "Rebuilding isn't just about the past. It's about the future we choose to create." Outside, the stars shone steady, a timeless witness to the courage it takes to heal and the power of second chances. Frank sat quietly in his favorite chair, the soft hum of the evening settling around him like a warm blanket. The day's conversations, walks, and small victories had left him tired but strangely energized. His mind drifted back to the early days of his transformation, to the moment when Elon Musk's fearless mindset had first ignited a fire inside him. Fearlessness wasn't about reckless bravery or the absence of doubt, it was about leaning into uncertainty, embracing failure, and refusing to be confined by limits imposed by age or circumstance. Elon's life was a testament to this philosophy. Here was a man who had taken risks that seemed crazy to many, launching rockets, building electric cars, colonizing Mars in his imagination. Elon didn't allow fear to dictate his path. Frank realized that adopting this mindset was the greatest challenge and the greatest gift of his journey. As a man over 60, the weight of years had taught him caution, restraint, and sometimes, resignation. But now, he saw fearlessness as a muscle he could build, a practice he could cultivate daily. He remembered a quote from one of Elon's interviews: "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." That phrase became Frank's mantra. It wasn't about winning every battle or avoiding failure. It was about committing to what mattered, regardless of the outcome. The next morning, Frank woke with a renewed sense of purpose. He set out to challenge his comfort zones, starting with a simple but deliberate act: signing up for an online coding course. Technology had always intimidated him, and the thought of learning something new at his age felt daunting. But he remembered Elon's fearless approach and decided to face the discomfort head-on. The first few lessons were tough, terms flew over his head, mistakes piled up, and frustration mounted. But Frank persisted. Each small success, whether a solved problem or a clearer understanding, felt like a victory. He reached out to fellow learners, joined forums, and embraced the community of beginners. This small act of fearlessness opened new doors. His confidence grew not only in coding but in other areas of life. Inspired, Frank took a bold step and pitched an idea for the Spark Club's next project: building simple robots that could assist seniors with daily tasks. The idea sparked excitement and skepticism. Many questioned if they could really pull it off. Frank responded with Elon's words echoing in his mind: "Persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up." The project became a symbol of their fearless mindset. Members of the Spark Club divided into teams, each tackling parts of the challenge: design, programming, building, testing. Mistakes were frequent, but so was laughter and encouragement. The process itself became a lesson in courage and collaboration. Frank found himself energized by the collective bravery of the group, watching as people who once doubted their abilities now experimented boldly. Meanwhile, Frank also worked on his personal fears, the fear of rejection from his daughter Lisa, the fear of physical decline, and the fear of irrelevance. He began practicing mindfulness and journaling, confronting those anxieties with honesty and compassion. One afternoon, during a Spark Club meeting, Frank shared his struggles openly. His vulnerability inspired others to open up, creating a deeper bond and collective strength. Elon Musk's fearless mindset wasn't about being unafraid, it was about feeling the fear and moving forward anyway. Frank saw this every day in his life and in the lives of the people around him. As the robot project progressed, local news caught wind of the initiative. Reporters came to the community center, intrigued by the idea of seniors building technology to help their peers. The story aired on local television, sparking interest and pride in the town. Frank and the Spark Club members were invited to speak at schools, libraries, and senior centers. The recognition was new and thrilling, but Frank stayed grounded, reminding himself that the real victory was the mindset shift, the courage to try, to fail, and to keep going. One evening, Frank received a message from Lisa. She had been following the news stories and was curious about the project. She asked if she could visit the workshop. When she arrived, the air was filled with the hum of creativity and the buzz of possibility. Lisa watched as Frank and the others tinkered, laughed, and problem-solved. She saw a different side of her father, one she hadn't known before, a man who refused to be defined by age or limitations. After the visit, Lisa approached Frank. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she said softly. "You've changed so much. It's inspiring." Frank smiled, feeling a mix of relief and joy. The fearless mindset wasn't just changing his life, it was healing relationships too. One night, as Frank prepared for bed, he reflected on the journey. Fearlessness was not a destination but a daily practice, a choice to show up fully, embrace uncertainty, and persist despite doubts. He whispered to himself, "This is the real revolution, the courage to keep moving forward." Outside, the stars glimmered steady and bright, a silent testament to the fearless light within every heart willing to shine. Frank woke to the sharp clang of the phone ringing, slicing through the early morning stillness. The sky outside was a dull gray, heavy with the threat of rain, matching the knot tightening in his chest. On the other end, Lisa's voice trembled, barely able to hold steady. "Dad, we need to talk. Mom's in the hospital." The words hit Frank like a thunderclap. His heart pounded as memories flooded back, the long, difficult years after his wife's passing, the loneliness, the silence that had filled the house ever since. But this time, it was different. Lisa's mother, his former wife's sister, who had become a close presence in their lives, was suddenly gravely ill. Frank's world spun, caught between shock and a deep, primal urge to be there, to do something. The storm outside seemed to mirror the turmoil inside him. He dressed quickly, grabbing his coat and keys, heart hammering as he drove through rain-slicked streets toward the hospital. The sterile scent of antiseptic, the muted beeping of machines, and the hushed voices of nurses greeted him as he entered the waiting room. Lisa was already there, her eyes red-rimmed but resolute. Frank reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We'll get through this," he whispered. Days passed in a blur of uncertainty and waiting. The doctors spoke in clinical terms, but to Frank, it was a fight against time and fate. The hospital became a crucible, a place where fear, hope, and love intertwined. Frank found himself drawn into the rhythms of caregiving, learning the nuances of medical jargon, coordinating visits, and simply sitting with Lisa in silent solidarity. In those quiet moments, Frank's fearless mindset was tested like never before. Fear wasn't something to push aside here, it was a constant companion. Yet, he remembered Elon Musk's words about persistence in the face of adversity and the importance of hope as a fuel for action. Frank leaned on the Spark Club's community, sharing updates and drawing strength from their encouragement. They rallied around him with messages of support, stories of their own struggles, and reminders that storms, no matter how fierce, eventually pass. One evening, as rain hammered against the hospital windows, Frank and Lisa found a moment alone. "Dad," Lisa said, voice trembling, "thank you for being here. I don't know if I could do this without you." Frank squeezed her hand. "We're in this together. You're not alone." The experience rekindled a deeper connection between them, one built not just on blood but on shared vulnerability and courage. Outside the hospital walls, life seemed to pause, but Frank's mind was already planning for the future. He realized that facing this storm was not just about surviving, it was about growing stronger, about holding on to hope when everything felt uncertain. He began journaling again, pouring his fears, frustrations, and hopes onto the page. Writing became a lifeline, a way to process the overwhelming emotions swirling inside. In the midst of the crisis, Frank also found moments of unexpected joy. The small victories, Lisa's laughter over a silly joke, a nurse's compassionate word, a shared meal, became treasures. He learned that even in the darkest storms, light could break through. After weeks of uncertainty, the tide began to turn. Lisa's mother showed signs of improvement, her strength slowly returning. The relief was profound but tempered by the awareness of how fragile life truly was. As Frank prepared to leave the hospital that evening, he felt a quiet resolve settle within him. The storm had tested his fearless mindset in ways he hadn't imagined, but he emerged with a deeper understanding of courage, not as the absence of fear, but as the decision to face it head-on. Driving home through the clearing sky, Frank reflected on the journey. Life, much like Elon Musk's ventures, was unpredictable and often harsh. But it was also filled with possibility, resilience, and moments of grace. He whispered to the night, "No storm lasts forever. And neither will this fear." Outside, the stars began to peek through the dissipating clouds, steady and bright, a reminder that even after the darkest night, light returns. The experience deepened Frank's commitment to his own transformation and to helping others navigate their storms. He expanded the Spark Club's mission to include support for members facing health crises, loss, and other challenges. Together, they built a network of care and courage, proving that fearlessness wasn't about going it alone, it was about leaning on each other. Frank's journey had always been about more than personal change, it was about creating a community where hope thrived and no one felt forgotten. That night, as he lay in bed, Frank felt a peace he hadn't known in years. He wasn't just surviving the storm, he was learning to dance in the rain. Frank stood in the center of the bustling community hall, surrounded by familiar faces and a few new ones, the air thick with excitement and possibility. The Spark Club had grown from a small group of curious seniors into a vibrant hub of creativity, learning, and connection. Tonight was special, a celebration of what they had built together and a bold step toward the future. Frank glanced around the room, catching the warm smiles, the eager eyes, and the quiet determination in everyone gathered. This was more than a club, it was a movement, a living testament to the power of reinvention at any age. As he stepped up to the podium, Frank's heart swelled with pride and a touch of nerves. He began by recounting the journey, from the lonely days when he felt invisible and stuck, to the spark Elon Musk's fearless mindset had ignited in him, to the courageous steps each member had taken to rebuild their lives and relationships. "We are proof," Frank said, voice steady, "that it's never too late to change, to dream, to create. Our age is not a cage but a launching pad." The room erupted in applause, a chorus of hope and empowerment. After his speech, the evening unfolded with workshops, demonstrations, and stories shared with laughter and tears. Members showcased projects, from homemade robotics to digital art, blogs about life after 60, and community outreach programs. Frank moved through the crowd, soaking in the energy and inspiration. Lisa approached him, holding a tablet displaying a social media campaign she'd designed to bring more visibility to the Spark Club's mission. "Dad, this could really take off," she said, eyes shining. "We can reach so many people who feel like they've been left behind." Frank smiled, feeling the powerful synergy between generations. The future wasn't just about technology or innovation, it was about connection and shared purpose. As the evening wound down, Frank took a moment to reflect on the transformation within himself. He thought about the fears he had faced, the fear of irrelevance, failure, and rejection, and how embracing a fearless mindset had shifted his life. He realized that the true ignition came not from technology or grand achievements but from the courage to keep trying, to keep believing in the possibilities. Inspired, Frank announced a new initiative, a mentorship program pairing younger community members with seniors to exchange skills, stories, and support. The idea was met with enthusiasm, a bridge between generations built on mutual respect and curiosity. Over the following weeks, Frank dove into the planning and organizing, energized by the collaboration and impact. He worked closely with Lisa and other volunteers, harnessing technology and creativity to expand their reach. The program flourished, becoming a beacon of hope and learning. One afternoon, Frank received an unexpected invitation to speak at a regional conference on aging and innovation. Nervous but determined, he prepared a talk that wove together his personal story, Elon Musk's fearless mindset, and the collective journey of the Spark Club. On the day of the conference, Frank stood before a large audience, many of whom were grappling with their own fears about aging and change. He spoke with honesty and passion about the power of mindset, community, and action. The response was overwhelming: standing ovations, heartfelt conversations, and invitations to collaborate. Frank felt a renewed sense of purpose. Back home, the momentum continued to build. The Spark Club became a model for other communities, inspiring similar groups across the country. Frank's story, amplified by Lisa's outreach, touched countless lives, reminding people that transformation was possible at any stage. Through it all, Frank remained grounded, remembering the quiet moments of doubt and despair that had once threatened to overwhelm him. He understood that fearlessness was not about perfection but about resilience, compassion, and the willingness to step into the unknown. One evening, as Frank and Lisa sat together watching the sunset, he shared a thought that had become central to his journey. The future isn't something that just happens. We ignite it, with every choice, every connection, every brave step forward. Lisa nodded, a smile spreading across her face. And the best part? We get to do it together. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, a perfect symbol of endings and beginnings intertwined. Frank felt a profound gratitude for the journey, for the lessons learned, and for the chance to ignite a future full of hope, purpose, and fearless possibility. In that moment, he knew that the story was far from over. It was just beginning. Frank stared out the window of his modest home, watching the evening light fade behind the distant hills. The quietness around him was both comforting and heavy, a reminder of the relationships left frayed and the silence that had stretched across years. Since the spark of change had ignited within him, many things had shifted: his mindset, his daily habits, his sense of purpose, but one bridge remained untouched, the one between him and his estranged son, Michael. The last few years had been marked by missed calls, unopened letters, and the cold space where conversation once lived. Frank's heart ached with the weight of regret and unspoken apologies. Tonight, he resolved to face the fear that had held him back for so long. The thought of reaching out after all this time was daunting. What if Michael rejected him? What if the wounds were too deep? But then Elon Musk's voice echoed in his mind: persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up. If Elon could pursue impossible dreams despite setbacks, Frank could muster the courage to try again with his son. With trembling fingers, he drafted a message, honest and simple: Michael, I miss you. I'm sorry for the years lost. If you're willing, I'd like to talk. After sending the message, Frank felt a strange mixture of hope and dread. Days passed with no response. He busied himself with the Spark Club's activities, trying not to dwell on the silence. Then one afternoon, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice on the other end was unmistakable: Michael. The conversation was awkward at first, filled with tentative words and pauses heavy with emotion. But as they spoke, years of distance began to dissolve. Michael shared his own struggles and frustrations, his pain and longing for connection. Frank listened, really listened, without defensiveness or judgment. Over the following weeks, they continued to rebuild their relationship piece by piece. They met for coffee, talked about old memories and new dreams, and began to find common ground. The process wasn't perfect, there were missteps and misunderstandings, but the willingness to try was a victory in itself. Frank felt a profound sense of healing, not just in his relationship with Michael but within himself. He realized that rebuilding bridges required vulnerability, patience, and a fearless willingness to face the unknown. The experience deepened his belief in the power of transformation at any age. He shared this journey with the Spark Club, encouraging others to reach out and mend broken connections. Many found the courage to do the same, discovering that it was never too late to heal wounds and open doors. One evening, Frank and Michael sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the night sky. Michael turned to his father and said, "I'm proud of you, Dad. You've changed so much. You've given me hope." Frank smiled, feeling tears prick his eyes. "I was never too old to try. I was just waiting for the right moment." As the night deepened, father and son talked about the future, plans, dreams, and the new legacy they would build together. Frank knew the journey ahead wouldn't always be easy, but it was filled with promise. The bridge was no longer broken. It was alive, strong, and full of light. Frank woke early with a sense of quiet determination settling over him. The days of merely surviving, of feeling like an observer to life's unfolding, were giving way to something deeper, a renewed sense of purpose that fueled every breath and step. Over the years, he had weathered storms of doubt, loneliness, and loss, but now he felt a fire burning steadily inside, sparked by the fearless mindset Elon Musk had inspired in him. This morning, Frank sat at his kitchen table with a notebook open before him, pen poised. He wanted to capture this new purpose, to give it shape and direction. The Spark Club had grown into a lifeline not just for himself but for many others who had felt invisible or stuck. Yet, Frank sensed there was more to be done, a way to reach beyond their small community and touch lives far beyond. As he wrote, ideas poured forth, workshops on embracing change, storytelling sessions to share wisdom across generations, partnerships with schools and local businesses to foster connection and innovation. Frank imagined a network of empowered seniors rewriting what aging meant, challenging stereotypes and lighting the way for others to follow. In the days that followed, Frank threw himself into action. He reached out to contacts, organized meetings, and brainstormed with Lisa and the Spark Club members. Together, they crafted a plan to launch a larger initiative called the Legacy Project, dedicated to harnessing the collective experience, creativity, and courage of seniors to inspire societal change. The project aimed to amplify voices often overlooked, creating platforms for storytelling, mentorship, and community innovation. Frank felt a thrill at the possibilities. One afternoon, he sat down with Lisa to record a video message announcing the Legacy Project to their growing audience. As the camera rolled, Frank spoke from the heart, his voice steady and warm. "I used to believe that getting older meant fading away, that my best days were behind me. But I was wrong. We are the authors of our own stories, no matter our age. The Legacy Project is about embracing our power to change, to inspire, and to lead." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Messages poured in from across the country, stories of hope, gratitude, and newfound determination. People shared their fears and dreams, their struggles and triumphs. Frank realized this was more than a project, it was a movement. The work was challenging. Frank faced doubts and logistical hurdles, moments when the weight of responsibility threatened to overwhelm him. But each time, he recalled Elon Musk's words about persistence and embracing failure as a step toward success. The project grew, drawing in volunteers, sponsors, and collaborators. Workshops were held in libraries and community centers, bringing seniors and younger generations together to share skills and stories. The Legacy Project became a beacon, a space where aging was redefined as a time of possibility and purpose. Frank found profound fulfillment in witnessing transformations. Not just in others but in himself. He saw that purpose wasn't a destination but a living, evolving journey. He shared these reflections with the Spark Club, encouraging them to continue embracing fearlessness in every aspect of their lives. One evening, as Frank and Lisa walked home from a Legacy Project event, they talked about the incredible journey they had taken together. Lisa smiled, "Dad, you've given so many people hope. You've turned your story into a gift." Frank nodded, feeling tears of gratitude well up. "It's not just my story. It's ours. And it's far from over." The stars above seemed to shine brighter, a silent testament to the power of purpose rekindled. Frank understood that the Legacy Project was not only about changing perceptions of aging but about changing the world, one courageous act at a time. With every step forward, he embraced the truth that he was never too old to matter, to lead, or to dream. Frank's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the microphone, standing before a crowd gathered in the town's community center. It was one of the largest audiences he had ever spoken to, and the weight of the moment pressed on him, but beneath the nerves was a fierce resolve. This was the culmination of years of struggle, growth, and transformation, a moment where he would share the story that had changed his life and, through it, ignite a spark in others. The room was filled with faces of all ages, some curious, some skeptical, others clearly searching for something new in their own lives. Frank began with a question that had haunted him for years: what if everything you believed about getting old was wrong? The words rippled through the room, drawing listeners in. He spoke candidly about the loneliness, the fears, and the doubts that come with aging, the feeling of invisibility, the ache of lost opportunities. But then he shared the turning point, discovering a fearless mindset inspired by Elon Musk's relentless pursuit of possibility. Frank recounted how those words had lit a fire inside him, challenging him to reject the notion that his best days were behind him. He told of the small steps that led to the Spark Club, the rebuilding of broken relationships, the birth of the Legacy Project. As Frank spoke, the audience was silent, captivated by the raw honesty and hope woven into his story. He talked about the power of choice, the courage to take risks, to embrace failure as part of growth, to lean into discomfort rather than shy away. "Fearlessness is not about never being afraid," Frank said, voice steady. "It's about acting in spite of fear. It's about saying, I still matter. I still have purpose." After the speech, hands raised with questions and heartfelt thanks. People shared their own stories of struggle and hope, and many expressed a newfound belief that transformation was possible no matter their age. The event was more than a speech, it was a gathering of kindred spirits ready to rewrite their narratives. In the weeks that followed, Frank's story spread beyond the community. Media outlets picked up the tale, fascinated by a senior's fearless journey sparked by the example of a younger visionary like Elon Musk. Interviews, podcasts, and invitations to speak at conferences came pouring in. Frank found himself in a whirlwind of activity, but he remained grounded, always returning to the core message of hope and action. One afternoon, Frank sat down with Lisa, reviewing plans to expand the Legacy Project nationally. They dreamed of connecting seniors across states, creating a vast network of empowerment and support. Lisa smiled, "Dad, look how far we've come, from that lonely kitchen to this movement." Frank nodded, pride swelling. "It's proof that change isn't just possible, it's inevitable if we dare to start." Despite the excitement, Frank knew the journey was far from over. Challenges awaited: logistics, funding, skepticism, but he faced them with the same fearless mindset that had carried him this far. Each obstacle was an opportunity to learn, to adapt, to grow stronger. Late one evening, Frank reflected on the man he had become. He wasn't the same person who had once believed his story was finished. He was someone who had embraced the unknown, rebuilt relationships, sparked community, and ignited a movement. His legacy was no longer a question of age but of courage, purpose, and connection. As he looked out the window at the stars, Frank whispered to himself, "This is just the beginning." The turning point had arrived, not as a single moment but as a series of brave choices that together created a new life filled with hope and possibility. Frank sat quietly in his favorite armchair, the soft glow of the lamp casting warm light over the room. Around him, the house was filled with echoes of laughter and conversation from the evening celebration. Friends, family, and members of the Spark Club gathered to honor the journey they had all shared. It was a moment Frank had once thought impossible, a vibrant community, connected and thriving, with a clear purpose and boundless hope. The years of struggle, the fears, the moments of doubt, all had led to this new chapter. As Frank reflected on his path, he remembered the day when he first questioned everything he thought about growing older. The loneliness that had once consumed him now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by the fierce conviction that life was not a slow decline but an unfolding story full of potential. He thought about Elon Musk, not just the man but the symbol of fearless thinking and relentless pursuit of possibility. It wasn't Musk who had changed Frank's life directly, it was the idea that no matter the odds, no matter the age, transformation was within reach. Frank's eyes grew misty as he considered the bridges rebuilt, especially the one to his son Michael, whose presence now filled a place in his heart that had long been empty. The Legacy Project, born from a simple desire to connect and empower, had grown beyond anything he could have imagined. Seniors across the country were stepping into new roles as mentors, creators, and leaders. They were telling their stories, inspiring change, and proving that age was no barrier to impact. Frank thought about the countless messages of thanks and hope that continued to arrive, each one a testament to the power of a single spark to ignite a wildfire of transformation. In the quiet moments, Frank often found himself pondering what it all meant. He realized that the true legacy wasn't a trophy, a title, or even the projects they had built, it was the shift in mindset, the courage to rewrite what aging meant, and the commitment to keep pushing forward. "I was never too old," he whispered to himself, "I was just waiting for permission to matter again." Looking around the room, filled with faces glowing with joy and purpose, Frank knew that permission was something he had given himself, and in doing so, he had given it to countless others. The future was wide open, full of promise and possibility. Frank's story was no longer about the past, it was about the new beginnings each day held. As the celebration continued, Frank stood and raised a glass. "To all of us," he said, voice steady and full of warmth, "to the fearless, to the hopeful, to the ones who choose to keep dreaming and doing. Our legacy is alive, and it's just getting started." Glasses clinked, laughter echoed, and in that moment, Frank felt an overwhelming sense of peace and purpose. The journey had been long, but the destination was worth every step. This was his new legacy, a life transformed by courage, connection, and the refusal to fade away. As the night deepened, Frank knew one thing for certain, no matter what the future held, he and those like him would face it boldly, together. Age was not the end but a powerful beginning, and with that truth, anything was possible. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?